There are places on this earth that are defined by desperation. The US-Mexico border is one of them. For the last 6 months, a chilling pattern has emerged. Men are found dead, drowned in water barely deep enough to cover their boots. There are never signs of a struggle. Never any witnesses. Except one. Always one. The victim's own child, found sitting on the bank, soaking wet and struck silent by a horror they cannot name. What unseen current pulls these men to their deaths? What ancient sorrow has so deeply stained a stretch of the river? And what terrible sight is enough to steal the voice from a child? One federal agent sought the answers, and found himself staring into an abyss of grief that had festered for centuries. The official file called it the anomaly at Marker 113, a label as sterile as the government office that produced it. But for Senior Border Patrol Agent David Miller, it was a cancer in his gut. For 6 months, the anomaly had been a quiet, gnawing dread at the edge of his jurisdiction. "You see it all out here," he'd later state in his unofficial debrief, his voice a low rasp recorded on a cheap cassette deck. "Heat stroke, dehydration, cartel violence, you build a callus on your soul. You have to." But this was different. Marker 113 was a gentle, deceptive curve in the Rio Grande. The water was shallow, the current lazy. A family could walk across it without the water rising past their knees. Yet, for the third time in as many months, Miller was standing on its bank at 2 a.m., watching paramedics zip up a body bag. The victim was another single father. And just like the others, his son was the sole witness. The boy, Mateo, was 6 years old. Swallowed in a foil emergency blanket, his small face was pale under the flashing red and blue lights of Miller's truck. His eyes were wide, dark, and utterly vacant, staring past the agents, past the ambulance, towards the placid, black water. Miller knelt, his joints creaking. He kept his voice soft. "Mateo," he said in gentle Spanish. "Can you tell me what happened to your papa? Did he fall?" The boy didn't blink. He didn't shiver. He just stared, a silent statue of trauma. Miller had seen shock before, but this was different. This was a hollowing out, as if the boy's voice had been scooped from his throat and thrown into the river. The next day, at the station, a child psychologist suggested giving Mateo crayons and paper. Miller watched from the doorway as the boy sat at a small table. For a long time, he did nothing. Then, his small hand picked up a blue crayon and drew a jagged line for the river. He drew 2 stick figures standing in it, one large, one small. Father and son. Then he picked up the black crayon. On the other side of the figures, he drew a third. It was tall, impossibly thin, and draped in what was clearly a long, white dress. When he got to the face, Mateo's movements became violent. He didn't draw eyes or a mouth. He scribbled over the head again and again, a chaotic vortex of black wax, a furious, fearful void. From that black son of a face, he drew thick, blue teardrops that fell into the river. A cold dread, heavy and real, settled in Miller's stomach. The investigation went nowhere. The official autopsy was inconclusive, listing the cause of death as drowning, with no signs of foul play. Frustrated, Miller authorized audio surveillance at Marker 113. For 2 weeks, the rookie agent assigned to the van heard nothing but the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind. Then, one Tuesday night, his voice crackled over the radio, tight with panic. "Miller, you there? I've got something." "What is it, rookie?" "Coyotes?" "No, sir." "Listen." The sound that came through the speaker was faint, but it cut through the night static with chilling clarity. It was the sound of a woman weeping. A desolate, gut-wrenching sob that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Where is it coming from?" Miller demanded. Is there anyone on the thermal? Negative, sir, the rookie stammered. The bank is empty. There's no heat signature. There's nothing there. The sound grew louder for a moment, a wave of pure, bottomless grief, and then it was gone. The silence it left behind was more terrifying than the weeping itself. The next day, Miller drove 2 towns over to a dusty diner to meet a man he hadn't seen in 10 years. Henderson was a legend in the Border Patrol, retired now, with a face like a worn leather map. Miller told him the story. When he mentioned Marker 113, Henderson put his coffee cup down, and all the color drained from his face. Marker 113, Henderson said, his voice low. We had a different name for it. La Silla de la Llorona. The weeping woman's chair. You've heard it, then. The crying. Henderson nodded grimly. Heard it? I've seen what it does. The old-timers, the real ones from back when, they said the spirit of a woman is tied to that water. A woman betrayed by the man she loved, the father of her children. A woman who, in her madness, drowned them. He leaned forward, his eyes burning into Miller's. She hates fathers. Hates them with a coldness you can't understand. She sees them leading their boys across the water, and she remembers. She takes them as payment. You stay the hell away from that spot, Miller. You can't fight a ghost. But Miller couldn't let it go. That night, he went out alone. He didn't park his truck, he hiked a mile downriver and set up a sniper's nest on a ridge overlooking the spot, watching through a high-powered night vision scope. For hours, there was nothing. Then, just before 3 a.m., he saw them. A man, Javier, holding the hand of his small son, Luis, wading into the river. Miller's heart hammered against his ribs. The audio feed from the hidden mics, piped into a small earpiece, was silent. Too silent. The crickets had stopped. As the father and son reached the middle of the river, the temperature display on Miller's scope began to plummet. Then, the weeping began. Not faint this time, but loud and immediate, as if the source was right beside him. Javier froze, his head whipping around in terror. Luis began to cry. Dejano's end pause. Javier screamed into the darkness, his voice cracking. El no es tuyo. Leave us alone. He is not yours. The boy, Luis, raised a trembling finger, pointing into the dark water just behind his father. Through the scope, Miller saw it. The river began to bubble and churn, though there was no current. A shimmering, distorted shape rose from the water. It was skeletal, vaguely female, draped in a tattered white dress that swirled around it like smoke. Long, black hair was plastered to a face that had no features, only 2 dark, empty pits where eyes should be. It was La Llorona. She didn't scream. She simply opened her mouth, and the sound of weeping intensified, a weaponized wave of crushing despair. She lunged. Her incorporeal form passed directly through Javier's chest. Javier's eyes went wide with a shock that wasn't of this world. He gasped, his hands clutching his heart as if it had been frozen solid. He collapsed face first into the shallow water, his body convulsing once before going terrifyingly still. He had drowned without ever taking a breath. The spirit turned its hollow, weeping eyes toward the screaming child. Adrenaline dumped into Miller's system, overriding all reason. He broke cover, standing up on the ridge and chambering around. He fired 2 shots from his service pistol into the air. Bang! Bang! The sound shattered the night. The apparition shrieked, a sound of pure rage this time, and recoiled from the noise and muzzle flash. It dissolved into a black mist that was absorbed back into the river, vanishing as if it had never been. Miller scrambled down the rocky ridge, splashing into the cold water. He grabbed the hysterical child and dragged him to the safety of the American bank, holding the sobbing boy against his chest and staring back at the water, his own heart a cold stone of dread. In his final, unofficial report, Miller's words were stark. I pulled the boy out. I filed my report. The official cause of death for Javier Reyes was listed as cardiac arrest. I cannot officially log the cause of death as supernatural. But I know what I saw. We've changed our patrol routes. Some places belong to the dead. We leave this one to her. The story ends there, but the footage does not. The last clip is from a forgotten surveillance camera, left behind at marker 113. The shot is static, showing the calm, empty riverbank. For 5 long, silent seconds, nothing moves. Then, faintly at first, a sound drifts in on the wind. The sorrowful, eternal echo of a woman weeping. The sound grows slowly, a chilling promise of the horror that waits, forever patient, in the water. It doesn't stop.